Hello, it is Monday, 4422, 4422. This is Medusa Was Framed, and my name is Joyce. And today I'm going to talk yet again about the Coquina quarries, what's left of them, that presently are at the bottom of the Matanzas River in Flagler Beach, St. Johns County, Flagler County, basically the area south of St. Augustine. I think this is the third video that I've made about coquina. So coquina essentially is a form of limestone. It can be found on the beach heads from the Florida Keys all the way up into Halifax in Canada. It can still be found on beach outcroppings from at least Melbourne Beach, India Atlantic area, all the way up into the Carolinas and along the Golden Isles and such. It was an incredibly vital part of colonial construction. What stands in my city of St. Augustine is still standing because of coquina. Everything else burned. I'm scooting back to the starting point here. It is reputed to have been chosen to build this fort, and this fort is the Fort Matanzas, which was redone in the 30s. This picture being supposedly taken in 1913, and to build the Castillo San Marcos, which is the famous star fort here in St. Augustine, because the story is it repelled cannonballs, that they would just bounce off, just bounce right off. Well, I don't know about that. Nobody really does, but it's certainly an important building material. Now, there were 17 coquina quarries listed in the region, what we now consider St. Augustine and north of St. Augustine, all the way down south of St. Augustine into now what we call Flagler County, named after Henry Flagler. What is now the depths of the Matanzas River was once beachfront, and what is left of the coquina quarries there would have been outcrops on the beach, the same that we currently have outcrops at Washington Oaks, down near Cape Canaveral, and there's a couple other places that have vanished from my mind right now. But anyway, I'm just going to show you some pictures of some things that have been built of coquina over time, how important it was to this city and America's development in general. This, as I said, was the original Fort Matanzas, which was built in 1740. It sits on the Matanzas River around the bend, around from the sand dunes from its mouth at the Atlantic Ocean. Was built in 1740. This is what it looked like in 1914. And it was restored in the 30s as a WPA action. But anyway, that stuff has stood a good long time, clearly, and it held its formation together. What changed was the sandbar beneath it. obviously, as is kind of the case around here. St. Augustine, where I live, we have 3 rivers, 2 big creeks, and the Atlantic Ocean, and we are completely surrounded by salt marsh. So it's very, very changing land. This is another shot of Fort Matanzas, not only deteriorating under the shifting sand, but trees and things growing around and on top of. Now, this is Coquina in its natural state, revealing itself from a beach portion of what we now call Flagler Beach in Flagler County. You can kind of get a sense of what it looks like, just jumping up. Somewhat quarried, some outcrops, a little bit of both. Okay, and this is our big star fort, which is about a 10-minute walk from my house. This is the Castillo San Marcos, which you can tell from that overhead shot. You are not looking at Coquina on the top. It has changed, but the fort itself, the foundations of the fort and the seawall and the reinforcements for all this moating was all Coquina out here too. All that's Coquina. Seawall here, the seawall there, and then the seawall that they built around the city was done in 1690. Story is the Castillo took 20 years to build, started in 1672, finished in 1696, and then the seawall in 1690 and the city gates in 1702. That's what they say. That's where we started. This is showing how Coquina was quarried. So there would be juts of it that would be discovered on the beachfront. Back-breaking labor, getting in there with a variety of tools. Given the tools at the time, we're talking about the 1600s, actually up into the 1800s when the plantations were still being run and built. Coquina being quarried all of that time. Very hard work. Now, this would be a representation of what was called the King Quarry, which was across the Matanzas River from St. Augustine and Castillo San Marcos on land that we now call Anastasia Island. And I know that that's where this is because of the representation of the lighthouse. This was the first St. Augustine lighthouse. It was called the Anastasia Beacon at the time. And it was built entirely of coquina as well. And this is where that quarry was. There were 16 or 17 quarries in this region of coquina, just being a natural limestone that developed along the way. And so 16 of them were quarried and accessed in that period of time from the middle 1600s up into the 1800s. This would have been removed and done with what it was, and then basically put on sleds that were dragged across, which was kind of swampy, marshy, sandy stuff at the time with mules, and then put on ferries or barges and schlepped across the river. So this was back-breaking labor, whether it was for the Castillo or for buildings in the city of St. Augustine, schools, things like that, important homes. This is the original lighthouse, which is gone. It was taken out by a hurricane, and then what was left after the hurricane damage literally fell into the ocean. The new lighthouse doesn't look like this. But interestingly enough, what is left of this lighthouse are some of its foundation stones, Coquina foundation stones. And if you go to the current lighthouse and you walk toward the water from the lighthouse, if the tide is out in what is now a boat launch, you can see the old foundation stones of this. But yeah, this was all Coquina as well. Now this is the Castillo San Marcos. Very fabulous old Coquina, very weathered over time. Coquina there, Coquina here, everything's Coquina, the seawall's Coquina. And you see the water in the moat. These were Coquina. This is the Matanzas River, and then across here, this is what we now call Anastasia Island, and the quarries were out of the picture. The quarries were like over here. So that was a considerable trip to get that Coquina, first of all, across the island, then across the river and into place. It's about a 2.5-mile journey from where the King quarries were to the Castillo San Marcos. So in the 1600s, with wooden sleds and mules and wooden ferries, that was quite an undertaking. Now, I'm going to show you some pictures from Google Earth, some screenshots from Google Earth of what's left of the Coquina quarries that are now at the bottom of the Matanzas River, south of St. Augustine. This is the Matanzas River. This way is north, so this way is south. So it's south of here. These quarries would not have been used for the Castillo San Marcos or the city of St. Augustine, but they were used for Fort Matanzas, which we saw. That was the first slide that we saw, all falling apart building. And all of the buildings on the plantations in Flagler County. And there were many. Folks came from all over Europe to get in on the very fertile soil and start plantations. We had sugarcane, rice, cotton, indigo, booming plantation cycle, but they were not good neighbors. And well, the Native Americans who they stole the land from ended all of that for them. This is what Fort Matanzas looks like today. This is the Matanzas River. And so this is the Matanzas River near the Atlantic Ocean. And so the quarry pictures that we're going to see, or I should say the outcrop photos that we're going to see, would have been some of the sites where the stone for this was built. So realize not every single stone here is an original stone. You saw how it was falling apart, but they did use Coquina to shore it up and replace it in 33. I don't know where they quarried that Coquina from, but it is Coquina nonetheless. It's all Coquina. It's at Fort Matanzas National Monument. So this is a map from 1835 of all the plantations that were in what we now call Flagler County. Here's the Atlantic, here's Florida. And what we see here, this is now the Matanzas River. But isn't it interesting? It was not the river then, right? It was not. It was not the river then. It was beachy, sandy. Isn't that interesting? I can't read all of these. Mrs. Anderson's plantations, the Battle Plantation, Williams Plantation, Harriet's Plantation, McBar, Dummel's, I've heard of that one. The Hallover Creek, okay. Ormond's Plantation, yes. Bulow Plantation, that's the most known plantation around here. It was a sugar mill. And almost all of Bulow Plantation was built out of Coquina. And it's still standing. And expansive piece of land. When the Seminoles decided to come back and pay the lying Americans for not holding up their part of the Treaty of Multi Creek and burned all the plantations down, that put an end to the plantation business in Florida. But because Bulow is almost completely built of coquina, most of it is still standing and well charred from that smoke, from that fire that knocked everything out. So this is interesting. You know, you're seeing, this would have been the Halifax River down here and the Matanzas River here. But at some point, and I'm not sure when, this was dredged to be part of the Intracoastal Waterway, that inland body of water that goes from Halifax in Canada all the way down to Key West. So what had been a little tributary here, you know, and a little tributary here, Mulberry Creek, there was an area where it was all dredged out. In this place, it just would have been salt marsh. Or, well, I guess at the time it would have been beach, excuse me. At the time it would have been beach. Now it would just, if it weren't dredged, it would be salt marsh. So yeah, at some point it was dredged, but you can see where we're going to be looking at photos from Google Earth. At the time, it was considered land. It was beachy. Interesting to consider. All that Department of Reclamation and water management and how much can we terraform and change this terrain and flood areas and turn them into waterways, and interesting, right? Okay. This is a cool little thing that I just found a couple weeks ago, actually. This is on what we now call Anastasia Island, which was across the Matanzas River from the city of St. Augustine. This is still considered St. Augustine. It's just across the river. And this is called the Old Spanish Chimney. What this is believed to have been is some kind of habitation and maybe an office for the quarry master and some of the stonemasons who would have worked at the King Quarries, the Old Spanish quarries, that were not too far from this place on Anastasia Island. And that is the coquina that built the Castillo San Marcos, the seawall, the city gates, and any of the buildings in St. Augustine in the colonial period. This is all that's left of that habitation. It's the chimney, as you see. And, you know, we're talking 1670s, it would have been built. It's well weathered, but fascinating nonetheless. And obviously this coquina came from the King Quarry as well. Okay, now we're going to start with looking at Google Earth snaps of some of this stuff. So this is a region of the Matanzas River in Flagler County, and here are the coordinates. You can pop on your Google Earth and take a look yourself. Now, some of these shots are going to be 3D, so straight up shot from above. Some you will see I snapped in 2D, which gives you a sense of the scale. But anyway, this one's in 3D, so it's straight looking down. Now, I just want to point out in some of the 2D shots, it looks like it's sticking out of the water. It's not sticking out of the water. It's just giving you a sense of depth. You can see that some boats were traveling by when this satellite image was captured. These are from boats. So if this were sticking out of the water or within a foot of the water, no one would be traveling right over the top of it, clearly. And this is in a portion of the city of Flagler Beach, where what you have on both sides of the river is state property, state park property. So convenient. You can't get there. Now this is interesting, isn't it? This looks somewhat terraformed, right? It's terribly straight, right? This side looks a little more natural. Sandy places here. The Atlantic Ocean is to the right. The houses, and let's see, is it Old Kings Road is over here. So the ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, is to the right of this photo. But again, see, now where this is taken, this was not water at the time. This on that old map is land. So this is all completely terraformed now. Water was diverted from the various creeks and such to create this water. At the time, in the colonial period, this was beach. And these outcrops of Coquina were on the beach, okay? So this is one of those. And see, it's in 2D, so you can kind of get a sense of depth. You know, you got to wonder if the person living here, and this being their boathouse, knows that there's a massive chunk of Coquina right outside their dock. But again, see, this was not water back then. This was natural beach front. And again, you can see, you see the effluvium here. There was a boat that went right there. And there was a boat that went right there. But there was a boat that went, see, right over the top. So this is not sticking out of the water, even though it appears. Another thing is stone sitting in water, even after hundreds of years, would not have these kinds of straight lines. This is obviously quarried stone. There's no way that that edge would be created in water. Okay, that's an overhead view. Same outcrop, see that's 3D. And you see, obviously quarried there, quarried here, quarried there. Interesting to consider how big this might have been, right? That's a sizable chunk. I mean, there's their boathouse. That's a big piece of rock. Here's another one, straight up. There's another boathouse and another boathouse, and that would be Old Kings Road, I believe there. So this is west, that would be east. Interesting, right? And again, this is the Intracoastal Waterway. It's part of the deep water channel that runs from the Florida Keys all the way up to Halifax in Canada. So this is water that at its depth is maintained to be at least 30 feet deep because vessels of all sorts come through, cargo ships sometimes. And you see, this is a very active river for water people. The boats went right over the top there or right by. So, you know, being someone who used to spend a lot of time on a sailboat, no one with a boat, whether it's a sailboat that requires 6 feet of draft or a John boat that requires 5 inches of draft, you're not going to want to rip over the top of something of that scale if you're in any danger of harming your ship. So this stuff is large and expansive, but it's not close to the surface, and it's certainly not a risk. 2D, so you can see scale. And again, here's your coordinates. It's bigger than their house. But again, definitely quarried, straight edge, 90-degree angle, 90-degree angle. I found out about this because a friend of mine, Andrew Zabrun III, his channel, Andrew Zabrun III, he had found a video that someone had posted from Google Earth of this particular piece right here. And the guy that posted the video, not Andrew, thought that it was alien construction at the bottom of the river. And this was the very shot that he shared, claiming that this was some kind of like, you know, an old castle of some sort, you know, this was the way in. But no, it's quarried coquina. Again, see, you've got over here where it's wild and untouched. A lot of Flagler County is protected. That's good, right? I'm all for land being protected, but I also know that involving the plantations and all the Native Americans and all the lives that have been lost in this area for various historical reasons, I am of the belief that a lot of land is locked up because of what is in the dirt there. And certain people don't want us to see what's in the dirt there because it's not land that you can go on. No one wants mass graves dug up. That might change the narrative too much. Hashtag Tartaria, hashtag mud flood, hashtag indigenous genocide. This is an interesting one. Very, very interesting. See, it's 2D, so you can see scale. When I saw this from the air, I thought it might be something else, like it actually might be something that was built. But see, you've got, it's in a lowered pit. So it's in an area that's been dug out considerably. And then you can see that it has been quarried. There are angles here, but it's very round from the top. And then there's a smaller round piece there as well. Interesting. Interesting. Do you think these people know that right outside their boat docks, there's this whole line of coquina. Wild! And again, I say no. You can see the effluvium from the boats. The boats are going right over the top of it, right over the top of it, right over the top of it. So no, these are not sticking out of the water, but that's, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 houses. So this line, this vein of coquina ran the expanse of what is 4 houses. So where these houses are were plantations, and on the plantations were various kinds of habitation, not the big plantation house, not the mansion, but there would have been barns and different kinds of workshops, rooms for dealing with and treating with the products and the livestock in certain ways, perhaps the habitation for the slaves and indentured servants, right? So walls and all that stuff, right? This was land back then. So this portion of the river is all man-made. Yes, the coastline has changed. Yes, waterways change, but this stretch in Flagler County was completely filled in and man-made. There's another shot of that. Run. Expansive, right? Look, so obviously quarried. Look at that. Look at those right angles. And look, in relation to the boathouse, just the size of this. I mean, 4 times the boathouse alone. Massive, massive vein. There were several times when the Seminole, the folks that were in this part of Florida, specifically the Timucun, the people that helped the Spanish and the French and the British when they first got here survive on the land and learn how to do things. Of course, as the case with indigenous people everywhere, they were lied to and they were manipulated and poisoned and taken advantage of. These fierce indigenous people fought back constantly and more than one. In 1823, something called the Treaty of Moultrie Creek was signed between the Seminole and the US government, basically saying, we will give you this land here, which is the land we're looking at, if you give us this land over here, which was near Orlando, what is now Orlando, and leave us alone. So that agreement was made. They signed the treaty with the US government. Moultrie Creek is a creek in St. Augustine, by the way. And of course, they lied. They didn't leave them alone. They took the land that they gave them, the land where I live now, didn't leave them alone in the land near Florida. And so they came back in 1835 and burned everything down. Everything that was in this area of plantation land, they just burned it down. And we know about the Bulow plantation, as I said, is still, much of it is still standing because most of it was built of coquina, and the smoke is still all over the coquina. And then dear President Andrew Jackson, of course, in enacted the Indian Removal Act and actively started having the indigenous people forced off the land onto the Trail of Tears up into Arkansas and Oklahoma. So this is not a happy region, what we now call Flagler County, or where I live, which is St. Johns County. This is not a happy county. There is not good history here. There is deceit and slaughter. And as I said, I think a lot of this area along the Matanzas River in the Flagler area is preserved because there's just too much skeletal proof of different stories than we hear. Look at that one. That's just fantastic. And again, look at the relative size. There's their house. Do you think that they know that that's right off the boat dock? And again, no, it's not sticking out of the water. A boat went right there. And two boats went right there. No boat would go that close to something like that. But these were fabulously large outcrops here. Just fantastic. Right? So like where this house is, that was the ocean. Well, close to it. I mean, this was all beachfront. There's just another angle of that one big piece. Interesting outcrop. How it just juts out in all kind of ways. You know, it was, not only was it physically heavy, but to get to the Coquina, they didn't find it because it was necessarily standing up and jutting out. I mean, there just might have been a little tiny piece of it that they saw on the beach. To get to the extent of it like this, they had to move all the sand around it. They had to dig a hole around it so they could access it. And they would take it down as far as they could, accessing as much as they could, and then start hacking it. Now, this is interesting. This does not appear to me to be a Coquina outcrop. It appears to me to be something else. Matanzas River here. This is all part of Washington Oaks State Park, and there are a few more pictures about that. There is a big, lovely outcrop on the current Atlantic beach right now. Pelsier Creek. This is a part that is just marshy, and much of it is unpassable, really. It's just so marshy and changing. When I first saw this image, you see it's in 2D here, but when I was rolling up the river and I saw this, I first thought that it was like an underground cable. And it wasn't until I zoomed in that I came to think otherwise. That's not an underground cable. That's fascinating. As you may know, the indigenous people of Florida were also known as the shell mound builders. Do you think that that's something residual from an indigenous habitation of some sort? Because this was all beachy. Pelsier Creek may have been here, may have fed into the ocean from here originally. This was not river back then. I don't know, but that's not a cable. Look at that. Man, oh man. What do you think? This is all indigenous land. And it was some time ago, hundreds of years ago, that it was dry land in an area that's marshy creek and changing anyway. For that to be seen still indicates that it is of considerable height still to this time to be seen. So this is east of there. This is the beach at Washington Oaks, and this is where there is Coquina outcrops now. You can walk here. This is state park, so no one can mess with this Coquina. No one can quarry it. But you see, these are just, you know, it's kind of here because the tide's going in and out, but this is Coquina jutting up. This is all Coquina jutting up. It's marvelous when, now see, isn't that interesting? See, that particular piece at some point was quarried. Interesting. But most of it is, or is it? Or is that, that might be a blip, actually. I think, because look at this. I think that's a blip. Sorry, I think that's a blip in the image, in the pixelating. But this is all uneven looking because it's all Coquina outcrop. Just the way that it naturally looks. So had this area been stumbled upon and harvested back in those times, of course, it was under the ocean at the time, but they would stumble upon it and they would dig out from underneath it, removing as much sand as possible so that they could access as much as possible and then start the quarrying process. This is just in here showing more of what was built of Coquina. So St. Augustine City Gates in 1861, gates today. So this was all and still is Coquina. Original for the most part. It is repaired as need be, but essentially this Coquina is the same Coquina as you see here today. This would have gone over the Kubo line, which was the southern line of the wall around St. Augustine. This is St. George Street. And what this crosses over, there's no water in the moat now, but this would have been the moat that went around the city, the Atlantic Ocean, and Castillo San Marcos is here on the left. And if you follow the Kubo line all the way to the end of the peninsula, then the Sebastian River is on the right. So the Kubo line. There may or may have not been water underneath here in 1861. I'm not sure. There certainly is not water under here now. But again, you see most of these buildings here are built of wood, and there were two massive fires in St. Augustine. They burned down. The only thing that survived, besides the city gates and the city wall, were the buildings that were made out of Coquina. There are some homes. There's a foundry. There's a school. There's a few other things. Okay, and this is at Washington Oaks State Park. This is the Coquina that I was showing you from above. This is when you walk down what you see. And when the tide is high, these little rivulets fill in and you have that wonderful smell of tide pools. But so imagine that of the 17 quarries that were around in the region, this is what they stumbled upon. And what these people would have to do, the indentured servants, the indigenous slaves, the black slaves, what have you, they would have had to remove all of this sand and dig down, dig down, dig down, dig down, dig down, and reveal as much of the coquina as possible before they started harvesting. This is a wonderful place. If you come to St. Augustine and you have a car, I just really can't stress enough. Take the trip to Washington Oaks. It's $4 to get into the park. There's an expansive park on the inland side. It was an old, it was a private residence, and then they bequeathed it to the state. Extensive property that includes very old, protected, magnificent oaks and rose gardens. There's an artisanal spring that flows through the property. There is a prairie portion, a marsh portion, and then the beach with all of this. And it's maybe 45 minutes south on A1A, the coast road, but beautiful, magical, wonderful place. And kids love, I see kids running on the coquina all the time. I'm a kid at heart. I like the coquina too. So anyway, that's the end of my slideshow. And I think, you know, the most interesting thing for me in researching this was considering how much the terrain has changed. St. Augustine has 3 rivers, the Tolamato, the Matanzas, and the San Sebastian, and 2 big creeks. And we have the Atlantic Ocean. So plus we're surrounded by salt marsh. St. Augustine, were it not quite so terraformed, and the terraforming in large part came from the coquina, was done with the coquina to reinforce banks and whatnot. St. Augustine would be here. Not only did it save us from a fortification standpoint, because the story is that the cannonballs just bounced right off the coquina. So not only did it serve that service, but it literally kept the land where it is in reinforcements along the water and whatnot, keeping the rivers and the ocean and the creeping salt marsh from reclaiming everything. The San Sebastian River is across the road from me. Yeah, it's a watery place. And to consider that the dredging that was done to flood an area that probably didn't even have a trickle of water at the time, to create the Intracoastal Waterway. You know, those outcrops of coquina would have been there and would have been visible when that was done. And I don't know, I can't find it, but I imagine that it was done when a lot of these kinds of things were done, that WPA 1930s work that was done, changing so much of the land here in the United States, either changing it like building dams and flooding things, or declaring areas national parks and basically making them untouchable for question. As I said, Flagler Beach, Flagler County is many decades of slaughter site. And so much of it to this day is city land or county land or state land that you cannot touch, cannot question. We don't want someone digging a foundation to build a home and coming across an Indian burial ground or a mass grave or foundations of burned buildings that might get people asking questions. We just can't have that. Anyway, thank you for hanging out with me today. You now know more about Coquina and Flagler County than you probably wanted to or even know there was to know anything about. So I thank you and see you next time.